So before diving into the technical part of this review, I just want to dive into what actually inspired me to buy this camera. Up until about 6 months ago, I hadn't owned a camera in a really long time. The last camera I actually owned was the Sony A7S, the first one, and obviously that camera is super outdated now to today's standards. So since I didn't own a camera, I would just rent a camera package every time I wanted to shoot a project. But after owning this camera and using it for the last 6 months, I honestly don't know how I went so long without having a camera like this. So just to give you a little background about myself, like I started in the kind of solo videography filmmaking space, like I feel like a lot of us do, around 2018, 2019. And for all those types of videos, I was shooting with my Sony A7S and it was really great for that. But as time went on, I got more interested in traditional filmmaking, cinematography, whatever you want to call it, and started shooting projects with like a small crew in a more traditional film sense. And during that time, I started using more high quality cinema cameras, so like RELX Classic, RE Mini, like some of the higher end Canon cameras. And my Sony A7S kind of took the back seat because its internal 8-bit codec just wasn't up to par with what I needed anymore. And then I eventually sold it. So once I started shooting on these higher end cinema cameras, I felt like I didn't really want or need like a smaller mirrorless camera with a much worse image quality. And my justification was that I would just rent these higher end cameras on a per project basis. But the problem with that is that I would hardly end up shooting anything. Cinema cameras are super expensive to rent and they usually require a small crew just to operate them. So the projects I was creating usually didn't have the budget to support that. And looking back, I definitely missed out on shooting a lot of projects that I could have shot if I had my own smaller camera like this one. So fast forward to 2025 and a lot has changed in the prosumer camera space. So in terms of image quality, the distance between these high-end cinema cameras and these lower-end prosumer cameras have gotten a lot smaller in my opinion. So let's talk about why I went with this camera, the Lumix S5iix. So after doing a bit of research, I decided I was going to go with the Lumix S5iix for a variety of different reasons. I originally wanted an FX3 pretty much because everyone else has one and it's a great camera and has a lot of great features. And you know, it helps that Sony is such a big powerhouse in the industry, so there's already kind of like a built trust there, if that makes any sense. Like if you work on larger productions, you know pretty much everything is shot on either a Venice or an Alexa. So what exactly persuaded me to go with the Lumix S5iix when it wasn't the most obvious choice? Well, the first thing is the price. I picked up the body for around $2,500 Canadian on a Black Friday sale, and honestly, for what this camera can do for $2,500 is pretty remarkable. Like, I'm pretty sure I paid more for my Sony A7S like 7 or 8 years ago. The second reason was open gate. This recording feature is usually only available on higher end cinema cameras, so the fact that it's available in this camera body was super intriguing. So open gate allows you to shoot your entire sensor, so 3x2, as opposed to the typical 16:9 recording format. And this feature has been really helpful for me, especially when I'm shooting stuff for socials. Having that extra vertical room when I need to crop in for like a 9:16 format is super helpful. The third reason is full frame. I knew I wanted the flexibility of a full frame sensor, and being able to purchase one for under $3,000 is pretty wild to me. So I've had this camera for about 6 months now, and I've shot a couple projects on it, so I feel like I have a pretty good gauge of its strengths and weaknesses. I'm very happy with the image quality that comes out of this camera. It has a variety of different codecs that are super flexible and easy to work with. And prior to this, I've never graded with Vlog before, but I've been finding it pretty easy to get the look I want out of it. So you have the ability to shoot ProRes with this camera, but honestly, it's not an option that I think I'll be using too often. Mainly because you have to record to an external SSD to record to ProRes in this camera, and I honestly hate mounting an SSD to these smaller mirrorless bodies. Like it just feels really clunky to me. Also, they're much larger file sizes, so you need a lot more space to store them, and I just find that like a bit overkill for the types of projects I'm going to be using this camera for. So the only lens I have for this camera right now is the Sigma 28-70, and it's a pretty good small zoom with a variety of different focal lengths, and it's pretty affordable. Down the line, I might pick up the Sigma 16-35 just to have a wider lens in my kit. The downside to L series lenses is that there isn't really a huge variety of them compared to something like E mount or EF mount. However, this wasn't really a huge deal for me because I knew I wasn't going to invest in a bunch of native lenses for this camera. Pretty much right after I bought the camera body, I bought a PL to L mount adapter as well. If the projects permit, I would rather rent higher quality cinema glass that have a lot more distinct character and looks than a lot of these photo lenses. The internal image stabilization for this camera is quite good. For someone who likes to shoot handheld a lot and would like to avoid using gimbals at all costs, this is a really great feature. However, I've noticed if you're shooting wider, like under 28mm, then you can potentially get a lot of warping in your image. So definitely something to look out for if you plan on using this feature. I'm not someone who cares too much about autofocus, but from when I've used it on this camera, it's pretty good. For talking head stuff for YouTube, it works great. I actually used it for some talking head interviews on a documentary I shot, and it worked really great for that at some pretty low t-stops. However, for most projects I'm shooting, I would never use autofocus at all. I really hate the look of the autofocus finding, and I think it just really gives an amateur feel to whatever you're shooting. If I had a shot that really called for an AC, but I didn't have one, I would rather just pull focus myself while operating and kind of risk the buzzing and have my character kind of fall in and out of focus more naturally rather than depend on autofocus. Now, this isn't specific exactly to this camera, but having a smaller camera is really nice. It's really light, so it's a lot easier to hold handheld shots. You can easily mount it to things. You don't need a large fluid head that can hold a heavy payload. You can mount it to a C-stand to get like cool overhead shots. All these things would require a lot more support if you were using a bigger cinema camera. I currently have this camera rigged out with like a V-mount, rods, and a cage, but I want to get more of the native like LP6 batteries for this camera so I can really shrink it down to its smallest form factor if I want to. Filming these B-roll shots for this video was like a little bit of a pain. Like I had to carry around my massive tripod in this wagon that I don't really need for a camera of this size, and even carrying around a fully rigged camera, like, you know, it kind of weighs you down a little bit. I just want to be able to get this camera to its smallest form factor and maybe even pick up like a smaller tripod for when I just want to run out and film something quick and when I don't want to be tied down by all the extra weight. So owning a smaller camera like this again, even for just 6 months, has been really beneficial to my filmmaking career. It really just inspires me to stop coming up with excuses and just get out and shoot more. Regardless of the scale of the project you're working on, it's just good to go out and flex the filmmaking muscle, even if you're just filming stuff for your YouTube channel. In the past, I would always get tied up in the gear I was using or the budget I had, just because I really wanted my projects to look a certain way. And all this ended up really doing was stopping me from shooting as much as I could have been. And I've just been really inspired and impressed, honestly, by like the quality of work people can make as a solo filmmaker. Using cameras like this one, you can really create something that punches way above its weight class. So that's it for this video. I'm planning on creating a video series about how I shot a small documentary using this camera, so stay tuned for that. And if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, all that, and I'll see you in the next one.